Doing, my Hebrew brothers and sisters? Welcome back, Hebrew Nation. Of course, I'm moving still with the motion that the Ekegusii are a lost tribe of Israel, so I'm still gallivanting with that motion, and nobody's going to take that away from us. Yes, the Ekegusii are a lost tribe of Israel, and we are Hebrews, by covenant. So today I'm going to talk about the name Anoka. Anoka is a Native American Dakota tongue, and I will tell you the meaning, what the people say it means, what Native American people say it means, okay? Now, anyway, I not only use the Bible as a historical text, but also as a religious text, okay? So with that being said, I operate under the premise of Genesis 11:1, that at one point the world was one language, one culture, one speech, they spoke the same language. And because man rebelled against God and they used occultic means to try and, they tried to build stargates and occultic means which they could contend with God. So God said, no, that's not going to happen. And he broke the languages and divided the languages. And that's why we have tribes and different ethnic groups. Right? So anyway, now, with that being said, I've always been working on a theory I call the demotic rubrics theory. Why? Because I just see language as being a uniblock initially before God broke it down, right? So anyway, now this is how I test myself and I test my theory. The first time I had the name Anoka, I used my language, the Ekegusii-Hebrew language, and I use it together with Hebrew to find the meaning. So that's how usually I test myself before I look at what the meaning that the local people say, points to. So when I first had the name Anoka, in my head, it went kind of like a computer because I have a weird head. So when I first heard the name Anoka, in my head, I just thought, the first thing that came to my head was transition, preparing to travel, motion. So transition, motion, and then I had the name was initially Anoka Tanhan. So Tan, of course, Etana in my language means to cross or divide, okay? So when I just had the term Anoka in my head, the first thing I thought was transition, change, and division. So now, those are the first things that just clicked on my head. And that's how I tried to test my theory that in fact, languages were once one culture, one language, one speech, okay? So now, if you go over and look at the Dakota meaning of this name, Anoka means coming from both sides or from both ends, okay? So as I was playing around with the name Anoka, a friend of mine asked me to go with him to a restaurant, and as I was leaving the restaurant, I come across the old map of Anoka, and if you see it, there's a river in between separating the two lands, or the one land, okay? So it divides it, Atana in my language, okay? So it divides it, in Hebrew tan, dividing. So in that sense, I didn't even go looking for it, but I just came across it like as an accident, just an old, map of Anoka. Now, I do believe some Hebrew translations are not necessarily accurate, or should I say wrong, because 50% is an F, right? So if you give me half the definition, it's still an F. You see what I'm saying? So. And this has been largely because the Western body of knowledge wants nothing to do with African languages and its connection with the Bible. right? Because that's what colonialism does. It, disengages you and tears you out from your orientation, so that you'll never be able to connect the Hebrew language and the African language are one, okay? Because power is knowledge, and who owns anyway even the written knowledge of Hebrew? It's mostly the Western body of knowledge and white people in general, okay? So now we have to start thinking outside the box. Now, with this definition, I'm going to explain to you how the African Hebrew languages come in, but I'll explain to you the meaning of Anoka using African Hebrew languages, and I'll show you how Native American Dakota language connects to the African and the Hebrew to bring out the real name of Enoch. Okay, now if you look at Western text, I say Western because most of the language or the wealth of the Hebrew language is being transmitted through the eyes of the white man, or should I say the white culture or white consciousness. Okay, so some translations don't really hold water. They're not necessarily totally wrong, but they don't hold water. Okay, kind of like the name Solomon, okay? The name Solomon and his other name Lemuel, okay? Lemuel, if you use the Bantu languages, the name Lemuel in Ekegusii, the word Remu means calmness. It means peace. It means calmness. You see that? And Eri in my language is God. El in Hebrew is God. So it means child of peace, child of strength, because Remu means not only peace, it means strength, it means to stand out. The same name Lama in Swahili, you'll find it means somebody who's educated, but Lema means to stand out. You see, so the name of Solomon, you can trace it back using Bantu languages. If Africa is the mother, we gave birth to the world language. Using this same reasoning, I figure the name Anoka in my head would have an African, intonation to it, because we are life. We gave the world life, okay? So, now, when I researched the name Anoka, I found that it meant from both sides or from two sides. Why? Because when the settlers or the Europeans came in, in the early, was it 1800s, 1700s, they settled in Anoka, but it was a city that was in between two rivers. You see that? Two rivers. So now, looking back, I said, oh my God, what were the initial meanings that I had in my head? It was transition, change, movement. So the concept of a river, dividing, Anoka not only bears light, or is the same meaning not only in African language but also in the Dakota Native American name. Isn't it funny that you can find your brother anywhere of the world, one part of the world, just using language. Now, if you look in Ekegusii, the word Enoka. Now, I believe that the word Enoka in Ekegusii is really the root of where the name Enoch was derived. Now, if you look at Western translations, you'll find that Enoch actually means, according to Western translations, Enoch means the dedicated one, or the concept of stimulating the food palate, like midwives used to do that with dates so that the children are able to use their taste palates, should I say. Yeah. So when I looked at the name Enoch, it bothered me because Enoch doesn't really, to me, I feel this is one of those translations again that is, I'm sorry, I would give an F. Sorry, I mean, not to say that I'm good or anything, but I would totally give an F. Why? Because I don't feel that the name Enoch or Hanok or Chanok in Hebrew means dedicated. I don't believe that. However, using the Ekegusii translation, I'll show you how, okay? Now, in Ekegusii, the name Enoka means, when you ask somebody, Mo Enokire, Enoka means that you are getting ready to travel, but it's a concept of that you were once, say, seated, or you were once doing something else, but you people are in motion. So it's not, it's a verb. I want to say it's a verb. So Enoka has a concept of, two things working in the same time dimension. When I say time dimension, Enoka carries the concept of arising and movement, but from a prior motion of state that's different. Do you understand that? So when you say more Enokire, somebody knows you guys are already in motion. That's why when I had the Dakota name Anoka, I connected it to Enoka. I just said, I know this name in my head. I know in my head this name Anoka has something to do with motion, with transition, with a concept of things existing within two things working within the same time dimension. Okay, so the concept of transition would have to do with the name Anoka before I even checked it out. Okay, using just Ekegusii, well, guess what? When I went to look and found it's from both sides, or meaning from both sides, I was like, oh my God, it's exactly the same as Ekegusii. But it doesn't surprise me, but it does. I was shocked. So now, when I looked at the full name, Tan Han, in my head I just saw Tan. The Hebrew word Tan in Hebrew is where you derive the name for Satan. Okay, Satan is not projected in Hebrew as this monster, this ugly monster. He's actually projected as a divider, as a foe, or as an enemy. Okay, in Ekegusii, excuse me, in Ekegusii, Etana means to become enemies. Okay, Etania means to exceed. Okay, the name Ethan means a steady or firm floor. Okay, and that's why you find the name also Daniel, Atani Eri. And I've talked about it in my past video. I talked about it in my video Eli Lama Sabatani about the meaning of the word Tan. And in Swahili, a divider is called mtatani, or the concept of a situation that brings worry or resentment is called, utatani. So it's from here that you have the name Satan. Okay, so when I saw Anoka and Tan, I just knew it had to do with the concept of transition, movement, and change. Okay, and Ekegusii, it's exactly the same thing. Now, this then now brings us to the name Enoch. Now, if you look in the Bible, Enoch, I believe, is mentioned, I want to say 3 times or 4 times. Now, the first Enoch we encounter is the son of Cain, I believe. Cain gives birth to a son called Enoch. Okay, and then you have the valley Enoch that was named after Cain's son. Then you have the Enoch who is a descendant or an ancestor of Noah. Okay, so Enoch gave birth to Methuselah. Methuselah gave birth to Lamech, and Lamech gave birth to Noah, I believe. I think that's how the genealogy goes. If I get it wrong, forgive me. I'm sorry. But yeah. Now, if you look at the text or translations in Hebrew, they all say it means dedicated. But sometimes when you can't find the meaning of a name, look at the name Lemuel. It says devotee of God, which really is true. But if you look at using the name Lemuel, if you look at Bantu languages, Lemuel either means strength, a teacher, one who is educated, one who stands above others. Okay, so Lemuel and then El, So the name Solomon, when God told him, your son Solomon, his name shall be peace. In my language, the name Remu means peace. Just like in Hebrew, Lemuel, name of Solomon, it means the devotee of God, but it carries the concept of peace. But if you use Western consciousness to translate, these names, the name Lemuel will never have the concept of peace or rest or comfort. But you find it in the suffix of Jerusalem or the name Solomon, which is Shlomo, Lomo. The concept of Lam, carries in Bantu language, you will find it means peaceful, strength, or comfort, or to stand out. Okay, and Solomon stood out not only in his knowledge but in terms of his leadership skills, and that's why Solomon was chosen. But his name also meant peace. So, but if you look at the translations, biblical, especially using Western consciousness, you will never find Lemuel meaning peace. Although Lemuel should also mean peace, aside from devotee or protege of God or learned one of the Lord. You see what I'm saying? Now, with the name Enoch, you will find the true meaning of his name. And let me see this. Well, anyway, if you look in the book of Genesis, you will find that there is a description that is given specifically for Enoch. That Enoch walked with God, and then he was not, for God had taken him. Okay, that's where you actually derive the name Enoch. Okay. So Enoch, to me, carries the concept of, using Ekegusii in the Dakota Native American term, Anoka, carries the concept of transition, or the concept of being in movement, okay? Changing from one dimension to another, or existing within the same time frames, okay? Now, when you look at Enoch's story, what was he? Enoch was interdimensional. He was able to interact with the fallen angels. Why? Because he always walked with God. And even though he walked on earth, his reality was not our reality. He had reached to, Enoch had reached a sense of higher self. I suppose through prayer and meditation, he had reached a sense of higher self where his protons, his neutrons, and electrons were able to be absorbed into the other dimensions, showing that, you know, in the Bible there's only two people who are known to have reached that kind of higher self: Elijah and Enoch. And now, with me saying higher self, I am not propagating for yoga, so please don't get me wrong. So I'm just trying to explain to you how should I say, I'm trying to explain like the, you know, the little quantum physics I know that I can use to explain how Enoch's body and Elijah's body were translated, you know, into other dimensions. Okay, so with that being said, now in Ekegusii, the name Enoch, of course, means to get ready to move, existing within two dimensions. Now, in Hebrew, they say Enoch means dedicated or inaugurated. Okay, that's what they say Hebrew, the definitions are. Now, when you come to the Kikuyu Hebrew language, the concept of Anoka, which I do believe is the name Enoch, Anoka means to be saved. Okay, to be saved. Now, when you're a Christian and you become saved, what does that mean? Like, so in this sense, so the name Enoch not only means to be movement or to be interdimensional, it also means a place where you seek salvation, or to seek salvation, not maybe in a dimension or a physical place. Okay, so the first physical place we hear that is called Enoch is where I think Cain was banished to, or where they sought refuge. Okay, so ask yourself, when you say you're saved, what are you saved from? Of course, you're saved from, primarily we'll say you're saved from the devil, you know. But how can you be saved from the devil if you don't really see him? How can you be saved from the devil? It's so simple. Well, when you get saved, it says, do not be conformed to the world, but by the renewing of your mind. It means that you make a covenant now that you're more highly aware and more Messiah conscious this time. It means that what I would do in the past, if I would go and say, if somebody made me mad, I would insult them. Now, when you become saved, it means that you're operating in a different dimension. It's by faith, but you're operating on a different dimension. It means that you're renewing your mind. You're not going to insult that person like you did, like you would have done in the past. Why? Because now you believe you're operating on a new dimension, okay? That's why they say, the name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous shall run into it and be saved, okay? Now, is there a tower that people can run to physically that is the name of the Lord that people can run into and they're saved? No. It's a concept of belief and faith and knowing that you're operating on a different dimension, okay? When you call on that name, you're on a different dimension, okay? So when Kikuyu will say, AHOMKA. So when Kikuyu say they're saved, what that means is that now they're operating in a different dimension. Then you become Honoka, you're saved, okay? It doesn't mean that your body necessarily lives there, but you're working on two dimensions, the physical and the spiritual. Enoch was working with the physical and the spiritual, but he had reached a point where his neutrons, his electrons, and his protons were able to be translated interdimensionally, okay? Now, another person would be Jesus, okay? Another person who was also able to be translated interdimensionally was Jesus, okay? Of course, the most prolific of them all. Now, in coming together, you see how the name Enoch was formed, Enoch, in fact, the Bible puts out this meaning that he walked with God. That was actually the quintessential definition of who Enoch was. To walk, he was constantly in movement. Just like in Ekegusii, when you say Anoka, you're moving. But it has to do with the concept of moving from one point to another, okay? So Enoch, I believe, even using the Kikuyu language, meaning that Cain sought refuge. So in the valley of Enoch, meaning he sought refuge. What was Cain seeking refuge from? He was seeking refuge from the shame of his sin. So he sought salvation in a certain valley that he named after his son. You see what I'm saying? Now, Enoch was interdimensional. He sought salvation, or he sought, revelation, or his highest self in a different dimension. Why? Because he's one of the few human beings who were able to reach that dimension. So on a large scale, Enoch was Honoka. Like, he had found a way for permanent salvation, permanent refuge. He knew how to seek permanent refuge in the dimensions, okay? So he didn't need for his physical body to die for him to be able to go to heaven. He had reached a higher self where he was able to translate himself. Okay, so, and even remember that with the concept of moving interdimensionally, the concept of time and space are very important. Time, space, the time frame and the space within which it's happening, okay? So basically, the way I can just roughly translate his name is that he's a traveler or an interdimensional traveler. So to me, his name just means one who's always on the move to travel. So Enoka, that's what it means, to Enoch, getting ready to travel. He was a traveler, and that's what his name meant. So I do believe some translations are not accurate or they're wrong. Okay, it's common sense, like we all know that we live in a three-dimensional earth, right? A three-dimensional space. However, even mathematicians will tell you that there is a fourth dimension, okay? And scientists will tell you about a fourth dimension. Now, I got this from Mike Hogarth, okay? And he was talking about the fourth dimension. Now, let me just put my disclaimer out here. Okay, I find some of the things that Mike Hogarth teaches are so intellectually stimulating and so informative, but I don't always agree with Mike Hogarth and some of his views, okay? So, which is normal, and that's the antimony of the creation of human beings, we can't always be the same. So, anyway, if you look at Ephesians 3:17, Ephesians 3:17 to 18, it says that Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith, that ye be rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all saints what is the breadth, the length, the depth, and the height. You see that? Now, we might ask ourselves, where was Enoch disappearing to? What dimension is this? Okay, the Bible does talk about it, and it does talk about it in so many, different pockets of the Bible. Now, if you look at Ephesians 3:17 to 18, you find there are 3 dimensions mentioned, which is the length, the breadth, the width, and the 4th dimension is height. Okay, so the 4th dimension is height. And now the Swahili language, which I do find is a cognate, and depending on what you're saying, the word Anoka, Anoka, Enoch. Now, in Swahili, the cognate will be Inuka. In Swahili, Inuka means to rise up, okay? It means to rise up, right? Now, when you look at Swahili, then you find out even the concept of the 4th dimension, Inuka, goes hand in hand with it, okay? Now, let's look at another verse that talks about height again, 4th dimension. It's Job 22:12. So Job 22:12 says, "Is not God in the height of the heaven? And behold, the height of the stars, how high they are." Okay? And that's why God is also called, the exalted one. Okay? And because of the concept of height. So, the heavens are in the heights. Okay? Now, when we talk about these heavens, are we talking about a physical height in terms of dimension? Is it a physical height? If God is in the height of the heavens, is it a physical height? No, I don't think so. But notice something funny. See, when you have a cube or a cuboid, you have the width, the length, you have the depth, okay? And then you have the height. What is depth? Think about it. Depth is how deep, deep something is, all the way to the bottom. And height is measured upwards that way, okay? Now, remember, there are verses also that support this in the Bible. Jesus says in Matthew 18:18, he says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, whatever is bound on earth is bound in heaven." What does that mean? It means that there are dimensions that exist here and dimensions that exist there. So that if you bind something here on earth, it's bound in heaven. If you loose it on earth, it's loosed in heaven. Meaning that we are always operating on a multi-dimension. People operate on multi-dimensions. However, this is my belief that there are people whose spiritual height is shorter than others, depending on how you have achieved the realization of your higher self. Okay, now people like Elijah and Enoch, I do believe that their height was pretty short. Okay, the spirit and the physical, that the distance was so short because this is where people were able to access amenities in other dimensions. So when the Bible is talking about height, it's talking about, the concept of what is below and what is above, okay? And you'll find the same philosophy in the occult. They talk about as above, so below. You see that? And really, the devil has no creative energy of his own, He borrows ideas. As above, so below. Whatever is bound in earth is bound in heaven. Okay, so clearly that Enoch was not only operating on this dimension of height, but on that dimension of height. That's why sometimes spiritual issues are so complex. Okay, and then we have the book of Psalm 102:19. So it says, "For he hath looked down from the height of his sanctuary, from heaven did the Lord behold the earth." The concept of depth is mostly used in, I want to say, physics and hydromechanics, and I forgot the other field. But the concept of height is mostly used in aviation and stuff like that. You see what I'm saying? So there's a difference in terms of how you perceive depth and height. Initially I thought, well, height and depth are the same, but they're not. Okay. Okay, so that's why you find in 2 Corinthians, Paul, the apostle, writes, of course, I know a person in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. You see that? So the concept of the heavens, again, the third heavens, has to do with the concept of height. Now, a spiritual height and not a physical height. That's why even the Tower of Babel, it was a tower that was built, but it was trying to reach a height that's not physical, a spiritual height. Okay? So there's so many instances where the Bible does support the idea of a fourth dimension that has to do with height. So even with the concept of Enoch, now using Native American, if you use Anoka, it means both sides. This can also mean interdimensional, because what it implies is that it's one plane, then there is a division, then another plane. You see what I'm saying? So it could be interdimensional. Now, if Enoch ever existed in, Native American law, I do believe he'll be called Anoka. That's just how I feel. Now, but using the concept of Anoka, Native American, and use Ekegusii-Kikuyu and Kikuyu Honoka, all those three definitions seem to incline towards the same kind of meaning. The concept of operating in two dimensions. The only meaning that is the odd one out is the Hebrew one that says his name means Enoch or dedicated. Now, Enoch also lived 365 years. Why? Because if you look, seasons, or if you look at the years, a year takes, 365 days, and he only lived 365 years. You see? So for me, I feel that using the Dakota Native American name, using Ekegusii Hebrew languages, that the name Enoch means one who is in motion, or one who is an interdimensional traveler, or one who travels on both sides. One who travels on both sides, and looking at his story, and look at the Bible, use the Dakota Native American meaning, use Ekegusii, and then use Swahili, which is Inuka, to rise up. When you rise up, you transition from a non-movement state to one that is, or from a seated state that is immobile to one that is different, okay? So the concept of two things happening within the same time frame still bears light, okay? So from what this tells me then is that Enoch's name not only means interdimensional, not only means transition, but it also means that if Enoch was going to another dimension, the direction that he took was upward. And by that, I'm using Swahili, the concept of Inuka, okay? So, and by that, he sought salvation out of this world, because he was Anoka. You know what I'm saying? He's Enoch. He can operate within two dimensions. Now, with all this being said, it doesn't surprise me that Anoka is the capital of the Halloween capital of the world. Again, Halloween is believed to be one of those, it started as, from the Druids, from what I hear from the Druids. And at that point, it was they would do human sacrifices, right? They would do human sacrifices, and by that, they believe that it's the one time that, and this is English law, okay? This is not mine. This is English, wherever Halloween comes from, is that the living dead would come, and the living dead, or the spirits of the dead ones, would come out and parade, and move around, so people wore masks so they wouldn't be recognized. Again, the concept of being interdimensional. It looks like Anoka might have embodied its name in terms of the concept of being interdimensional, or things existing within two dimensions. Okay. Okay, so the reason why, again, I say the reason why Anoka has not been translated fully like it should is because Western scholars, as usual, have rejected and totally put away the concept of African languages giving meaning to the Hebrew, because Hebrew is an African language. That's why some linguists believe that the Hebrew language is, you know, the mother language, the universal proto-pre-Babel language. Okay, now I do believe it's Hebrew, but I'm not sure what kind of Hebrew. I'm sure it's a way different kind of Hebrew, you know, but I do believe it's Hebrew. That's just my feeling. And if you argue that it's Hebrew, and I argue that Hebrew is an African language, then I should be able to find correlations between Hebrew and African language, and that's what I'm doing. But this time I added Dakota Native American because it also adds on to the theory that languages was once universal. So I do believe that Anoka is a translation for the name Enoch. Okay, so using Kikuyu, Honoka, meaning to be saved, using Ekegusii-Kikuyu, getting ready to travel, using Inuka Swahili, to rise. So which brings out the concept that the fourth dimension is actually has to do with the height that is spiritual and not physical. And then you have the revised Hebrew Honoka, Hanok or Chanok, which they say is dedicated. Yeah, it might mean dedicated, but based on what the story says, and based on the Native American term, based on Kikuyu, based on Ekegusii, the term seems to imply the concept of being interdimensional, or existing within two dimensions or within two time frames. Okay, so the translation for Enoch does, you know, as dedicated or inaugurated, does not really carry weight for me, because using African languages and the Dakota tongue, because I believe, you know, while languages were once one, the name Enoch cannot really mean dedicated or inaugurated. Okay. If you're a Dakota or Lakota Native American and you have this, please kindly tell me what you think in the comments. Make sure you comment, share, like, and subscribe. Don't forget. Yay!